Welcome to Techtastic, where we navigate the intersection of technology and business, uncovering innovations that redefine our world.
Brendan Davis, it's lovely to have you on It's Techtastic. Thank you for being here.
I appreciate it, Christian. I'm excited to be talking with you today.
You have a podcast called Get Over Yourself, and then you have Get Over Yourself LLC, which I assume is like consulting, coaching, that type of thing. Yeah. And one of the hardest parts is early, you're too naive to know you're wrong. And that could get in your way in a big way. And for me, that was my big stumbling block early is, the internet was new and I was out, convincing everybody they needed to go that direction. And I was right, but the way that I was right was wrong. I couldn't get over myself enough to listen. And it was when I finally started really listening that I was able to get past that and start to actually succeed in a big way.
Yeah. And honestly, as I think to some of my biggest mentors right now, obviously I'm still very young. I'm only 22 years old and I'm trying to make a name for myself and try and figure things out. And I believe starting young is the answer towards success. I'm not saying it has to be the end all be all, but I believe starting young is going to teach me these principles that are just going to elevate me beyond where a lot of people start when they're in their 40s, 50s, getting into their entrepreneurship career. It's a trade-off. If you're later in your life starting your first business, you've probably been in a field for 20, 30, 40 years and into a career very detailed. You know exactly all the ins and outs and everything that's a pain inside that industry. But at the same time, you're starting a little bit later. Odds are you have kids, you have a family, you have a mortgage, you have car payments, life just starts stacking up. The older you get, the more payments you have, and there's a lot you got to stress with. And so it's also scary and more risky, I would argue, later in life to actually get going. Whereas right now, me and my wife, it's just us two right now. As far as payments go, our life is very simple. We pay for food, we have our house payment, we have $100 to our car, and other than that, we live life very frugally. And that's because we're willing to take these risks a little bit earlier on, whereas later in life, and I could be wrong, I haven't lived that part of my life yet, but it is a little bit more difficult. It is a little bit more difficult, I would argue.
It can be. So I have the benefit of I started as an entrepreneur very, very young. And then I shifted from entrepreneurship into running large enterprise technology organizations because they were looking for that entrepreneurial experience to help them innovate, become digital, to inject a digital DNA is what I always said. But then shifted back, and I could shift back because I can afford it. I can bootstrap my company because I can pay my team out of my own savings account. And you can't do that when you're young, unless you were like a trust fund kid or something right? The ones that are impressive to me are the people that really do start from, I've got student loans, I'm going out and I'm going to make it happen. And maybe they got a little bit lucky. Timing's a big part of being a successful entrepreneur, right? It's like surfing. If you try to get in front of the wave too much, you just get washed over. If you fall behind the wave, you get left behind. You got to catch it just right. Especially with technology, finding that right moment in the wave to paddle fast and get up on your board is really the key to success with it. And some of that does take experience, but a lot of it's luck. If you come out of school at exactly the right time and you're in the right life stage that you don't have a lot of burden, you don't have a lot of things holding you back, you can take that risk. You can start pedaling fast without worrying about somebody with a mortgage and multiple car payments, multiple kids in college or whatever. They've got all that weight slowing them down. So it's always a trade-off. I encourage people that are later in their career that are trying to figure out what they're trying to do to invest in themselves. Take the bet on yourself. But it comes with a huge risk. You are betting on yourself.
And I think that's kind of necessary too, though. If you're not willing to take that risk and bet on yourself, odds are, in my opinion, it's not going to work out anyways. But I kind of wanted to jump back. At the very beginning of our conversation, you were mentioning how a lot of times you need a support group or some kind of cultivation when you're younger if you want to kind of jump into business at an early age. And I 100% agree. I remember my earliest days. I would get home from school, I'd get home from playing with my friends, maybe some sports and whatnot. And my dad, he's a busy guy, and so he'd get home as well, and he'd be on his laptop, and he always made it a priority to spend time with his kids and my mom, his wife. That's something you see a lot of businessmen these days kind of ditch aside, and you see a lot of marriages and a lot of families getting broken apart because somebody's building the next big thing. And I always respected my old man for that because no matter how busy he was, he would make sure he'd be home at a reasonable time at night, even if that meant he was still having to get some work done at home or he'd hang out for a couple hours and get back to work. He still made that time for us.
Yeah.
And I would say the cultivation that worked best for me is we'd get home, we'd sit on the couch, and sometimes he'd be working away at his laptop. But if we weren't watching a Dodger game, we were watching that ABC Shark Tank. And that is the funnest thing, like one of my fondest memories I have with my old man growing up, because I would see these so-called average citizens, somebody you could walk by at the grocery store, somebody you could go to your local church congregation, heck, somebody who could have been your teacher growing up, the so-called average citizen making a product that was changing somebody's life, not just their own, but some product that was hopefully helping somebody. And I remember just from that early young age, I would look at those people and I'd say, I want to be like them. And ever since then, that's where I first started in business.
Nice.
I was kind of like you. I had like these fun little side projects, selling water or random things at school.
Yeah.
But my first ever registered LLC in the state of California was my landscaping company, Davis Hoover Lawn Care. And all it was is I had an old beat up pickup truck I bought during one summer. I had a buddy who had some landscaping equipment. I'd grown up my entire life cutting my grandparents' grass. So I had a little bit of experience, I guess, mowing lawns. And my other buddy, he was a gritty guy. And so he said, all right, let's go try this out. So he threw all of his equipment in the back of my truck. We started driving door to door and we'd knock on people's doors. No idea what our sales pitch was, no idea what our pricing was. And we'd say, hey, my name's Brandon, this is Dawson, and we want to cut your grass. And maybe we were still young and naive and people were just helping us out because we were a bunch of high school kids looking for some extra cash. But we got a ton of clients and it started working out great. And that was like my first introduction to the business world, making my own dollar. I'd always worked for somebody else at that point. And so when I could like go home and say like, Mom, I'm taking out my girl tonight because I made my own money. That was the coolest experience of my life.
Yeah.
And then I think it just fueled me for everything else that I've been creating ever since.
Yeah, so I said at the very beginning, we have a lot in common when it comes to like upbringing and all that. My dad was a very busy man, as everybody's dad probably was if their dad was around.
True.
And when his mom died, when my grandmother died, my dad was kind of telling me, it's interesting. As you get older, you can get closer with your father because you start to have a lot of shared experiences. When you're very, very young, you really don't have a lot in common because you haven't lived a life yet. And, they've lived quite a bit of life. But as you get older, the distance in age seems less. Even though you're same distance apart, it doesn't seem as vast anymore. So my father, after his mother died, was telling me about like all these things he had learned from his parents. And one of them struck me as really telling that I noticed looking at a lot of the other people I grew up with, maybe why they didn't have the same self-reliance and self-value. And it was signing me up for Little League the first time, like when I was T-ball age, whatever that is, like 5 or 6 or something. And on the front is all the kids' information, all the child's information, and on the back is all the stuff that the parents are willing to volunteer for. And Dad at the time, he filled out the front and he looked at the back and he goes, I don't have time for this. And then we walked out. But I remember him turning around. We got about 20 feet away from the place where the sign up was because it was up in where the scorekeeper would sit during the game. So it was upstairs above the concession stand kind of thing, right? So we walked down and then he turns around and he goes, and he walks back in. And I didn't know what had happened. But he told me, just a few years ago, he's like, well, filled out the front of the piece of paper. I flipped it over, saw the stuff, and I thought to myself, I'm too busy. I've got too much to do. But as I was walking down the stairs, my mom was on one shoulder and my father was on the other shoulder. And my mom says, we had 7 kids and we did everything with you guys. And my dad said, and his dad, my grandfather, was on the other shoulder going, why do you think you're so busy that, you won't spend time with your children? And so he walked back up and literally put my mom and his name on everything, like concession, umpire, scorekeeping, all of it. And my whole life growing up, it didn't matter what we did. And they encouraged us to do everything. I mean, whether it was band, theater, art, sports, I played every sport. My brother played every sport. They just wanted us to be involved in everything and to try life. And they were always there. They were always involved, coaching, umpiring, whatever. That was true when it came to business too. Like the first time I raised money for a company, they were the first ones to volunteer money. And my parents weren't wealthy growing up at all. They would be the exact opposite of that. My dad was in the Air Force when I was born, and he was not a commissioned officer. So we were on that end of the spectrum. And he worked his way up in life, but they were always there and they were always willing to bet on me. And that was what gave me the confidence and the certain amount of self-reliance, but also like just having that constant interaction with your father was always there with you. There's a lot of similarities there with the, just having an active dad, active parents, that support network. It was also my grandparents. They were always, the second investor in my first company was my grandfather. Yeah. Right away. He's like, what do you need? And he was willing to volunteer. So having that support network is
I love it.
Critical, right? So tell me about Interroll. We haven't talked much about it. The name's come up a couple times, but it's your first tech startup. It sounds like it's a SaaS because you just mentioned that. What does Interroll do?
Yeah, pretty simple concept. It derived one day. My wife, she was going off to work, and I was walking around the park. I try and wake up every morning just by going on a quick little walk. She's running around, she just made her breakfast and she's running a little bit late. And she goes, "Hey, while you're on your walk, can you call Walgreens and check if my prescription is ready?" I said, "Yeah, sure. Like any good husband, of course I will." So I'm out on my walk and I call Walgreens, and I was amazed about what answered the phone. And I don't think it's across every single Walgreens location yet, but if you'll have to try this after the episode, call your local Walgreens and see who answers. It was a robot. It was a virtual receptionist.
Yeah.
And so I was like, "What on earth?" And so I start talking to it, and I'm like, "Hey, trying to see if my wife's prescription is ready." It goes through a couple verification details, birthday, random stuff like that. And I had a response within 2 minutes of me calling in and saying, "Yep, the prescription is ready. You could go pick it up at this location today." And I'm like, wow, that was incredibly simple. And then as I'm walking around the park, I hang up. Like I said, that was only about a 2-minute interaction, not thinking too much of it, just besides, oh, wow, that worked really well. And then I'm like, wait a second. I was just in California visiting my parents for a holiday. This is a little bit ago, and I got incredibly sick. Turns out I had COVID at the time, and I had to go into a pharmacy to pick up my order. But it wasn't your mainstream CVS, Walgreens. It's just kind of local mom and pop shop. And I remember I felt so crappy, and I kept calling in and calling in and calling in. Nobody was answering the phone. And I'm like, I need to see if my prescription is ready. I feel horrible right now. And I'm just laying on the couch, and, it was probably a man cold, but what my wife would call it, but I felt horrible. And so I remember thinking back as I'm walking around the park, I'm like, okay, that experience was horrible when I was trying to call into a company and they didn't answer. Walgreens answered within a couple seconds. Why don't all businesses have this option that get crazy high call volume, but can't always answer the phone? So that's where Interroll was born. It's a virtual AI receptionist for small businesses, trying to just target anyone and everyone who has staffing issues, who can't always answer the phone. And then down the road, eventually, if businesses are trying to cut back on costs, we'll be able to fill a little bit more of just a pure receptionist role. But so far, we've had users who are sign manufacturers, auto groups, pottery making studios. We're kind of all over the place because it's anyone who has been struggling with getting their work done because their phones keep ringing, but they also don't have like a dedicated person to constantly answer the phone. And so it's just like, whoever on the staff was closest to the phone at the moment would run over and try and answer the question, but then they got another phone call coming in.
Yeah.
And so now our software, it just simply answers the phone like a normal receptionist would, and answers any customer questions, schedules appointments, tracks any insights that the businesses could use for a better customer experience in the future or drive sales later down the road.
Nice. That is a good use case for AI and automation. That's fantastic. I'm curious, your cost to serve has got to be fairly high per call, not as high as a human being would be, but high for technology because of the reliance on an LLM coming back in. Are you profitable per customer yet, or is that some distance in the future?
So we're still in what we call our beta stage.
Okay.
So we're just trying to gather as much data as we possibly can from every single company, trying to figure out, okay, what is the average across various industries that they're actually going to be needing phone calls answered. Because our only costs come from our subscription bases of our phone numbers that we're using. So how many minutes are we actually using up? And so we're just trying to dial that in between different industries right now. And we're just charging operating costs for the moment. And so pricing it, eventually we want to be making 3.5x on every single client per month, because that's still underrating what the actual secretary would normally charge.
Yeah.
Picture in any major business, especially as our software becomes more and more detailed and we train our AIs even better and better and better. And then obviously integrations down the road, working with individual CRMs of the companies and whatnot. But a normal secretary, say they make around $4,000 a month, if we can even cut that in half, I'm a believer that a recession is bound to happen here in the next couple of years. The US has been going too strong for too long to not have it. And so our initial phase right now in beta testing, for anyone who can't see, I guess this is an audio only podcast, but I'm doing the air quotes. Our beta test right now is purely trying to figure out, okay, how much will it actually cost us to run in the future for various companies? And let's just try and figure out every single piece of information we can. So I know in a few years down the road, whether that's in 6 months or down in 2 years, or who knows how long the US can survive still, when that recession hits, we're going to be able to go into these businesses who unfortunately will have to lay off some of their work staff, but they still need people answering the phone. 63% of sales in various businesses that we're working with and targeting right now still happen over the phone.
Yep.
And they need people manning it, but they still, if they cut their workforce, they're going to be focusing on their business. They still need somebody to answer the phone. So that's kind of who we're going to merge into in the near future.
It's a great opportunity. It's a good space to be in. The reason I was thinking about it is the value versus cost to serve, or your full-blown COGS on that service are usually pretty amazing. Like if you're in anything in the AI space right now, the economics of it are phenomenally good. Especially when you're talking about this, where it's like in our world, what we're doing, we're focused on the software engineers, the technical staff in a technology organization, and their global average cost per hour is about $52 an hour, India, Southeast Asia, et cetera, as well as North America. When you blend that together, you get $52 an hour. So every hour you can save of their time, that's $52. And we can save them 7 hours per instance, that's $350. And that $350 we just saved cost us 3 cents to operate.
Yep.
Right. Like the economics of that are so disproportionate in anything that's happened before that the models that are going to come out of this, and I don't mean the large language models, I mean like the business models that'll come out of this are amazing. Like your company, what you guys are doing could easily be just a 2-person company because you could automate everything else under the hood. There's no reason to have a bunch of staff and a bunch of other technology. You need the phone service, you need the automation service, whatever you're using on your technology stack there that includes the AI piece of it, right? And then a billing system. And then what? Like, that's kind of it. It's a great business model.
Yeah, it's incredibly simple. Like you said, the reason we've stuck it with just the 2 founders at this point is because we haven't needed anyone else yet. We're actually looking to hire our first software engineer to kind of go along and just so we can blast this out even faster and make sure everything works right. And then we do a rolling acceptance into our beta program. And so every week we accept one new company and make sure everything's built out perfectly within that week, make sure there's no faults in it or whatnot. And so we're just going to be hiring one more person to be able to get rolling with that. But yeah, overall, incredibly simple to monitor, especially once it's all running. It's fairly simple. And I think your audience will appreciate this a little bit more than kind of the average Joe, because yours is obviously focused on tech. A lot of people at first were worried, like, obviously AI is coming for the jobs, right? Everyone's worried that AI is going to take over the future and take over every single industry. And how we view it is we're trying to bridge that gap between human interaction and artificial intelligence. At this point in time, like I mentioned, we're trying to help those businesses who literally cannot support a front office, whether that's due to margins or there's various reasons why that is, or they just get such heavy call volume that they need something else helping them in the background. But right now we're trying to bridge that gap. How can our software, our artificial intelligence go in there and actually help these companies still succeed? Bridging that gap is the way of the future. And I think a lot of people are going to start recognizing that. I'm excited to ride the wave. I'm excited for it.
Yeah. Well, and your business is a great example. The mom and pop store can't afford the front office person to just be answering the phone. They've got to be, I don't know what else they're doing, but like if it's a restaurant, they're probably the host or the bartender or both, right? And so like I want a reservation at your place and you're not on the service tools that are out there that you can use for that. But I really want to get in. Well, you're not going to survive in a world in which nobody can get reservations. You're not on any of those platforms and you really can't afford for a human being to be sitting there answering the phone. How do you survive? So having tools that, again, get the technology out of the way, solve for you these recurring and troubling problems is the way you get ahead. Instead of spending $2,000 a month on this person or $3,000 or whatever it is, I'm spending $150 a month or $200 or $500 or whatever the number is, right? I can afford that. It's well worth that. And the technology is not something I have to interface with anymore. It's just out of the way. It's solving a problem and it's in the background. Yeah, I love what you're doing. I'm thinking about it going, oh man, there's like 1,000 use cases for exactly what you're solving, which is fantastic, right?
There is. And I'll give you one example as well before we close out. Recently, I was just contacting it's kind of funny, a lot of my outreach so far has just been pure cold calling and cold emailing businesses. Because if I can explain it in as simple as a way as I did today, for anyone who's even not teching, just say, hey, our software will answer the phones for you and you'll get customers. And they go, oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
And so when I was doing some of these cold calls, it's kind of funny because a lot of the businesses that would be best that we would work with, obviously, are the ones that don't answer their phones to begin with. So a lot of going in person and trying to email back and forth, playing phone tag. And I explained to them, listen, this is exactly what happens when I call into your office and I go and I demo this in person. I call, nobody picks up the phone. And one of these times is going to bite me in the butt because somebody's definitely going to answer the phone. So far, it hasn't happened though. And so I call and nobody answers the phone. I go, okay, you just lost a client. Let me call one of your competitors down the road. Call, somebody answers the phone. I go, you just lost a client. And that's exactly why you need our software right now. And I think that's the gap that people are going to be recognizing here pretty soon. That's what we're super excited for over at Interroll. A lot of just show and tell. That's all it really is. You guys need this because you are losing business. And I promise you, $200 to $800 a month, depending on how big your business is, it's going to be worth it.
So check out Interroll. What's the website?
It's interval-ai.com.
Interroll-ai.com. This was a fun conversation. And I know we didn't talk a lot about tech. We've talked more about being entrepreneurs and our experience with our families and our networks around us. But I think to me, that's the more interesting part. Mentioned the technology fading into the background. That's got to be the goal. It's not all about that. It's about how do we have a bountiful life.
I couldn't agree more. That's so accurate.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Techtastic. I want to thank you personally for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Until then, keep exploring and stay curious.
Overwhelmed by tech debt? Discover Vala AI, the solution to tech challenges with the simplicity of a click. No engineering background? No problem. Vala AI enables anyone to effortlessly tackle tech issues, freeing up your time from tech headaches. Make tech debt vanish with Vala AI, where your tech solutions are just a click away.